So, you've just spiraled down the ADHD rabbit hole. It started with one TikTok, then a Reddit thread, then maybe a late night Google search of, do I have ADHD? And now you're here wondering, how do I actually get a diagnosis of ADHD in the UK? Well, I've been exactly where you are. Lost, overwhelmed, and quietly asking myself if something about my brain just works different. Incorrectly, I think. In this video, I will walk through everything I wish someone had told me, step by step, from GP appointments to right to choose, and what actually happens in the assessment. Before we get into it, please take a second to like, comment, and if you want to, consider subscribing. It helps me a ton. Thank you. So a little bit about my journey and why I got an ADHD assessment. I think in hindsight, I would have been the poster child for a typical child with ADHD. I was always the one in trouble for shouting out, being out of their seats, hyperactive, but not like bouncing off the walls hyperactive. I would pick, I would tap, I would fiddle with anything I could get my hands on. Personal favourite of mine was blue tack, and if I wasn't doing any of that, I would be daydreaming. And no one said anything. I then went to secondary school, then through both my degrees. And in my late teens, I did notice that I had rejection sensitivity and struggled heavily with emotional dysregulation. At the time, I thought they were just quirky personality traits. They're not quirky, they suck. I definitely was a bit spicy compared to your average Joe, but I just thought this was normal. However, a couple of years ago, and I'm sure you saw this boom too, there was a huge wave of ADHD content on platforms like Instagram, TikTok. It was the classic me doom scrolling and then seeing a video on Instagram and going, haha, that's me. Not noticing the ADHD awareness hashtag. And it was actually my girlfriend who one day very politely said that I do a lot of things that are common in people with ADHD. And of course, I was like, nah, that doesn't sound like me, my guy. But the more I started to piece together the cold, hard facts, the more I was like, yeah, actually, you may be on to something here. And the next thing I did was book an appointment with my GP. And this is the first step that I would encourage you to take, and that's to actually speak with your GP. Please keep in mind that your GP will not be able to diagnose you with ADHD. It has to come from a trained clinician. However, what they will be able to do is do a screener and talk about various pathways for you. So if you have any symptoms or even just an inkling that you may have ADHD, definitely book an appointment. The sooner you do it, the sooner you take that first step, and it is the hardest by far. But what actually happened when I was speaking with my GP? The first thing we did was just speak about my symptoms, that just had a handful of questions about my behaviors, and then I just rated them on a scale. My GP then took my weight and height, as well as blood pressure. And this is when my GP actually mentioned about the various routes of getting an ADHD diagnosis. And what I'm about to go over next is quite important because it can have an impact on how long you wait and what to expect. However, there's a lot of similarities in all these various routes of getting that diagnosis. And the first I'd like to talk about is right to choose. Right to choose is a legal entitlement under the NHS in England. It's part of something called the NHS Choice Framework, which gives patients more control over their care. Specifically, if your GP agrees to refer you to a specialist for an ADHD assessment, you have a legal right to choose which provider you are referred to. But unfortunately, it can't just be any provider. It has to be with a provider that has a contract with the NHS for this service. ADHD UK has some really helpful resources on this, so do check out their website. But I will go over a few providers shortly. There are some requirements, however. Firstly, your GP must agree to refer you. Unfortunately, it's something that you can't self-refer to. It has to be with a provider who offer right to choose, and here is a list of a few. I specifically went through Psychiatry UK, and they have been fantastic, but I'll go over that shortly. You must also be living in England and registered with a GP in England. There are a handful of benefits of using right to choose. It can drastically reduce your wait time. However, I want to stress that this is not a guarantee. It will be funded through the NHS, meaning that you won't have to pay. And let's be honest, if you don't have to pay for something, that's always nice. And you also have post-diagnosis support. However, if you don't want to go through right to choose, there are a few other options that you can consider. The first is actually just going through the NHS. This will be a very similar experience whether you go through right to choose or directly through a private clinic. Processes are pretty much the same, but through the NHS you'll still get that post-diagnosis support and it will be funded. However, one of the biggest drawbacks is the waiting time. It has a humongous longest waiting time currently. And this varies depending on who you ask, because they're all at different stages on this waiting period. But I've had people told up to 3 years in some cases. And the last route that we'll talk about in this video is if you go fully private. Again, you'll have a very similar experience whether you go through the NHS or through Right to Choose. But there are a few benefits of going private. This includes that you can self-refer. The other methods require you to get a referral from your GP. Some practices will basically allow you to skip that. There can, again, emphasis on the can, be drastically reduced wait times. However, there are things to consider. And the first and probably most obvious is that it's expensive. And it's probably what puts people off the most. It put me off. I couldn't afford it. But you have to consider it's not only just the assessment, it's for the medication, it's for the aftercare. There are a lot of things that go into it around just the assessment. And another really important thing to keep in mind is that you are able to transfer your post-assessment care to the NHS or your GP through the shared care agreement, but this is not guaranteed. GPs are not legally obligated to enter such agreement, and this means that you will be with that private clinic, having to pay for them every time you need a repeat prescription or a check-in. It's not to scare you off, it's just something to keep in mind. There are lots of people out there and private works well for them. They like the autonomy and the choice. There are thousands of private clinics out there. But after I did my screener and application, for me, I went through Right to Choose and used Psychiatry UK as my chosen provider. Next step on the journey, and you'll experience it too after your screener, is the waiting. It's just something that you can't escape, unfortunately. Wait times at the moment are very long. However, in the meantime, you may be asked to complete an assessment with your chosen provider or private clinic. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here because I need to set some expectations. Psychiatry UK, who are fantastic, this form was the longest thing that I have ever seen in my entire life. It will ask you everything under the sun. It will even ask you to get information from family and friends, so please bear this in mind when you come to complete your form. Part of me thought, actually, this is the test, and if you can complete this without a breakdown, then you're neurotypical. A joke, of course. However, after you complete that form, it will probably be more waiting. For me, it was around 13 months. I would get the occasional update email, but after about a year, I got an email from Psychiatry UK, and it basically just said, "Urgent, please read." And of course, I just thought that, this is probably just saying that we're going to be pushed back another year. But to my pleasant surprise, it was actually them saying that they had hired a load of new psychiatrists and that they could see me next month. This leads me nicely into the next step of the journey for you, and that will be the actual assessment with the psychiatrist. So what can you expect? Obviously, each experience will be different, but for me, it was fully remote. And when it came to the actual assessment, the psychiatrist was amazing. It made me feel really comforted, reassured. We did a full psychiatric assessment, which just involved being asked a load of questions around your childhood, your current life situation, relations, family history, what you were like at school, your drug use. But this is really important, to be open and honest and try not to mask. But they're there to make a judgment on you. They'll look at things like how you act in the meeting, what you say, and this is all just to support their judgment of whether they believe that you have ADHD based on various diagnostic criteria. This whole assessment took us around an hour, and after the assessment, the psychiatrist was like, "Yep, I'm pretty adamant you've got ADHD." And then we basically spoke about medications, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but if you'd like me to talk about ADHD medication, please let me know. And after your assessment, you'll be given a full document explaining your diagnosis. My favourite thing that was on mine was that the psychiatrist had written in their notes, "Sam fidgeted relentlessly throughout our call." And that's just the most real thing anybody has said about me ever. I appreciate that. But around a week after getting the assessment, I actually was then sent my ADHD medication, and to this day, getting my ADHD diagnosis and the medication has been probably the best thing and most pivotal thing that has ever happened to me. I have so much more control over my life, my emotions, my friendships, and now that I look back on it, I think, I don't know how I fell through all those layers, but I'm glad that I got there. It was a long journey, but it was so worth it. And I know to anybody watching, the journey may seem long, but if you focus on on those small steps, you'll get there. And like I said, I think the best place to start is just simply booking an appointment with your GP. But I am hoping to do more ADHD content. It's something that I've learnt a lot over the last 2 years. And if you're interested in keeping up to date with that, please hit that subscribe button. It does help me a lot. And please share your experiences in the comments. I'm always really curious to read what other people's experiences have been like, and it helps other people too. But I really do appreciate you watching to the end of the video. A huge thank you. Take care and goodbye.